would love to bring to the stage a different take on how to build the world. One of my favorite humans of all time, his name is Eiso Kant. He is the co-founder and CTO of Poolside. And there are just very few people in the world that that think about the world differently. And Eiso is building foundation models. And he's like using streaming as a new way, I think, to perhaps get a competitive edge. And so would love to bring on the stage Eiso. Eiso, welcome. What a pleasure, man. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Alex, so good to see you. You were far too kind with your words, but it's definitely mutual. There's very few people I've met over the last decade that have stuck with me as much as you. And I've also been super excited about what you guys are building because it's become a core part of how we operate here.
Yeah, it's like, you know what it is? I hope that audience feels this way, but you're such a clear thinker. And more important, like it's so easy for the layperson that isn't as sophisticated as you in thinking about AI and all of these things to just learn from you. So what a treat for me and hopefully for the Redpanda community to just get to hear from you today. Let's just kick us off by maybe a couple of minutes or a couple of sentences on like, what is Poolside? Why do you do? How does this streaming and tech, how does this relate to foundation models?
Yeah, so Poolside is one of a small number of companies that's truly in the race towards AGI. But we take a slightly different point of view than some of the general purpose model companies. We focus entirely on model capabilities for complex reasoning and coding. And so our models are entirely oriented towards how do we essentially close the gap in the coming years between human capabilities in software development and model capabilities. And if you think about what's happening when, and I want to make this as streaming related as possible, when we think about training foundation models, like fundamentally, we're talking of an end-to-end pipeline that we're building. At the top of that funnel of that pipeline sits incredibly large data sources. In our case, they're all text oriented. So think the entire web, all of the code that's ever been published online. And from that point as a starting point, at the very end of it, we have an artifact that we care about, right? Which is our final model. Now, throughout that, you can kind of look at the things we do as an extremely large amount of work on making at the very first stages of making the large data set that's going to train the base model. And this is essentially a huge set of data sources that have to go from being the raw internet to being as clean as possible text for training a model. But what most people might not spend time thinking about is when we're training a model, it's not that we built this great huge data set and then we just hit enter and we train a model. No, actually what we end up doing is that we end up doing a lot of work on labeling and classifying and trying out, and essentially a lot of metadata on top of all of the documents that we have. And then we are going to go and experiment at small scale. So very small models, at hundreds of small models. What are the data weight mixtures? What are the different approaches in how to use that data in architecture and hyperparameters that lead us to get to a place where we say, hey, this is the model candidate, the set of data we're going to use, the architecture we're going to use, the hyperparameters, the training regime, all of these things combined that we're now going to go and actually train a big model on, right? Something that might take weeks or in many cases, several months to train. And now you can start seeing why streaming ends up being relevant to us. I
love the way that you're thinking about it. And if people aren't taking this opportunity to ask you questions, they're missing out because it's like such a privilege. You mentioned something in a talk. I'm a big fan, and so I was watching you explain where the world is heading. And in it, you said something. Let me quote you there. You said, as we head into this agentic world, I wanted to pick your brain on how you think about a streaming first architecture for what you talked about this like multi-stage reasoning, right? So as we get like more, I don't know, as you're building the world, right? So in many ways, like I think all of us are just learning from one of these few companies, and you and Poolside being one of them, of pushing the frontier here for AGI, this like multi-stage reasoning. How do you think streaming is going to play a role in this multi-stage reasoning?
Yeah. So I think there's two areas of streaming that are worth touching upon. There's streaming and building foundation models, fine-tuning them. And then there's streaming in terms of them actually being an asset that we end up using and combining them with data. In the first world, the default in our space has been that data sets live all over. They get turned into they get turned into assets that live on S3, then get distributed across big training clusters. They're essentially materialized, and then they're distributed, and then some training happens. And as you can imagine, that can take days for extremely large pre-training data sets, that can take hours or tens of hours for essentially smaller ones. Streaming offers the ability to, actually, Yaroslav, what he described is very similar to what we have. We have a data lake, an Apache Iceberg data lake. In there, we have our assets. And then when we are training, we are streaming from those assets to our training process. And so that's honestly it's a huge developer experience and researcher experience upgrade, right? I can go very quickly from an idea and train 10 minutes later, where before it might take 3 days. In the inference side of the world, what you're talking about with reasoning, now all of a sudden we're living in a world where we have already a streaming asset, which is a model, right? Models themselves are essentially, just streaming out content. And so when we are pulling data from different sources, or we're piping together, different models and stuff, we're already in a streaming native world. And so it ends up being everywhere in your stack around it.
Right. And so the value for those of us, from an infrastructure, the value early on is like speed, developer experience, just being able to sample the data. I was like, hey, you don't have to wait whatever days to clean up your data, pre-train it, upload it into S3, blah, 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 and then process it. You can just get, like right now, you sort of get started to advance immediately.
Literally after this, we were joking, I'm at our monthly onsite with the team. I'm actually heading over to a table down here where someone's clicking a button. It's literally a single button. And it's the first time where we go truly end-to-end, automated at scale, fully streaming everywhere, meaning that there is like a model that's getting trained and evaluated. So it's from the data to the end. That before would have taken us, weeks to prepare, from making any changes in the data mix to now being able to say, I'm changing a config file here and I'm changing a data mix and I'm hitting enter. And all of a sudden we're training, 2 minutes later. Because this is the thing, model training is quite slow throughput. Even at extremely large scale, right? We train on 10,000 GPUs, but even if it was 100,000 or, the streaming throughput is actually not that high that's required for what the model can train. And so your throughput is amazing at Redpanda, and so it perfectly matches. So we can actually materialize data sets, but start training 5 minutes after they start materializing instead of having to wait days before they're materialized.
Gosh, it feels like a rocket launch countdown. And if people in the audience, I want to see you press the button. So if everyone wants like a TikTok of Eiso pressing the button, please let us know, because I almost feels like we're launching the rocket, baby. So thank you so much. One of my favorite people. What a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.